Many of you asked when the first movie about the Russo-Ukraine war would be made. Well, here it is! Wagner just released a movie called The Best in Hell.
У нас есть контракт. Контракт с компанией. Контракт с Родиной. С совестью.
The moment I heard about a war movie produced by the Wagner PMC, I imagined some sort of propaganda video stretched into a full-fledged movie.
Мы знаем, что попадем в ад. Но в аду мы будем лучшими. Лучшие в аду.
But in reality, it's very far from it. Essentially, the movie is very similar to Escape from Tarkov, except with bigger toys and more explosions, tanks, IFVs, and aviation. What's crazy in this movie, the war in Ukraine is never mentioned. Of course, there's the main group and their opponents, but they're simply called White and Yellow. Although we perfectly understand who is who, it's never explicitly mentioned in the movie. All we're told is that Team White has 2 hours to carry out an assault operation to seize buildings held by the Yellow. Then in the top right corner, the countdown begins. From this moment on, it's 2 hours of pure urban warfare, room breaching, close quarters battle, plus the role of armored vehicles and supporting weapons like drones, howitzers, and mortars. Let's be honest, The Best in Hell didn't really bother much with dialogue. But what it does well is to show the extreme complexity of a military operation, even a small one where you only have to capture a couple commie blocks. And what makes this movie even more realistic is that the script was written by no other than Alexei Nagin's own experiences in Ukraine, as a rather high-ranking commander of the Wagner PMC. How about we take a deeper look into this movie that some call ultra-realistic? Are you ready? Let's go!
В фильме белые ЧВК «Вагнер», желтые противник.
Combat, realism. It's obvious the director wanted to portray combat as realistically as possible. All the tanks, armored fighting vehicles, and howitzers fire real ammunition with real recoil, it's not CGI. Same realism when storming buildings. To be honest, it's not very fancy. Assault squads simply blast their way through. They use tanks or RPGs to create a hole on the side of a building, a part that is less defended. Then they throw a bunch of grenades into the breach and fire in every direction when storming the place. And when soldiers throw grenades, they don't pull the pin with their teeth, and the grenades don't explode in huge fireballs like in Hollywood, but a simple boom that is very effective in close quarters. If the assault squads can't continue their progression along a corridor because of enemy fire, back to the basics. They simply place some explosives on the wall and create a new path. Such firefights require so much ammo that soldiers constantly have to reload. Here this Ukrainian machine gunner says he's empty, and his comrade sends him another box. And a moment later, the Russian squad leader is also out of ammo, and the guy behind him takes a spot on the firing line. Or something similar where this Ukrainian machine gunner has to replace the barrel of his weapon after it was overheating. To me, all these details were much appreciated. But there was this other scene that I thought was tragically realistic. As in, I've seen combat footage that is almost identical to what is portrayed in the movie. The Ukrainians in the town call for urgent reinforcements, and 2 squads arrive on top of BMPs. Then they get ambushed by Russian mortars and a group of AGS automatic grenade launchers using a drone to adjust fire. Ukrainian losses are high. Survivors are running around for cover, pulling their wounded away, and everything around them is exploding. It's also one of the only scenes in the movie that is very graphic. There's this notion that soldiers get KIA or wounded without ever seeing the enemy. And that's the tragic reality of modern warfare. Essentially what's portrayed on screen is that there are tactics and technicality behind the fighting. Very different from how the media constantly refer to Wagnerians as a group of misfits, convicts, and cannon fodder. The Best in Hell shows another side, best portrayed by Alexei Nagin himself. He fought in Georgia in 2008 with the Russian military, then joined the FSB Special Forces, and later enlisted with Wagner around 2016. With them, he fought in Syria and in Libya. On the 12th of May 2022, Nagin was seriously wounded in battle in Ukraine. After a long treatment period that he used to write the script of the movie, he returned to the front in August. But in the end, he would be KA on the 20th of September near Bakhmut, a city that you're probably very familiar with by now. For some, this Very detailed and realistic portrayal of war made The Best in Hell closer to a documentary than to a movie. Fighting is often interrupted by the Russian commander that is explaining to us the tactical situation on the ground. In the very first minutes of the movie, we're even presented with an order of battle of each side, from an eagle-eye perspective, which is very unique in cinema history. We're even presented with the battle plan of each side. In this case, the push forward by Group Goblin. As you can see, the movie puts a lot of time and detail to show us how modern warfare is fought. So here the Russian commander and presenter is portrayed by someone called Alexei Kravchenko. And you're probably very familiar with this actor. He played the main character, the child, in this iconic World War II movie called Come and See. Now, many people believe that the battle portrayed in the movie was the real-life battle of Mariupol. But I don't know, I had a hard time believing it. First of all, because Wagner was not involved in this battle, and clearly the combat scenes are taking place in a sunny and green landscape. Not this dark, muddy, and gloomy end-of-winter weather like at Mariupol. In the end, I'm pretty sure the movie portrays the Battle of Popasna. I spent enough time reporting on this battle that I immediately recognized the map behind the presenter. And it's also the first key battle of the Wagner group in Ukraine. And surprise, surprise, Alexei Nagin was wounded only a couple days after the Russians captured Popasna. And if you allow me to nerd around, the area that the Russians control in the movie is the same that they controlled around the 28th of April. The movie does a great job at showing how infantry fights in an urban warfare type of setting. But it even goes as far as to explain the complexity of combined arms operations. It's interesting because the infantry needs the firepower of the tank, and the tank needs the eyes of the infantry to survive. Meanwhile, the infantry needs the mobility and protection of armored fighting vehicles. In this one, a Ukraine commander of a mortar battery receives target coordinates. They write all the information down on the paper and distribute it to every mortar crew. Then on the radio we hear some mortar lingo that I'm not very familiar with. So if you used to be a mortar crew, let me know in the comment section what it all means.
Основное направление 15, угломер 2762.
Прицел 759. Заряд 5.
Навестись, зарядить.
Первый расчет одной миной огонь.
But from what I saw online, the technicality is pretty accurate. The Russian troops on the ground are pinned down by the enemy in front of them, but now also by the mortars falling all around them. Then we see the deployment of what I think is an Istionok counter-battery radar, which detects the mortar battery around a certain area. Then the Russians launch a drone to get the specific exact coordinates of the enemy position. This counter-battery mission is given to a battery of D-30 howitzers located 15 kilometers away. Once again, the commander is provided with target coordinates. Then there's a huge repeat of everything with the Russian drone operator now adjusting fire for every one of the 3 shells. In the end, they managed to hit the mortar battery and inflict heavy casualties on the enemy. In my opinion, all this technicality is to show the audience that the fighting is not just about badass infantrymen or tank crews, but that there is an entire chain of command and guys at the rear whose role is crucial for the infantry to survive. We also understand that the guys at the rear manning these artillery or mortar units are not safe from death either. Here the Russian battery commander quickly orders his men to tow the D-30 howitzers and change positions before they suffer counter battery. But it's too late. A Ukrainian drone spotted them as they tried to escape. They get fired at and suffer a couple KIAs. In the end, the Russian battery is saved by electronic warfare, which jams the Ukrainian drone.
Нас рэбом задавили.
Dupe realism. A dupe is an almost identical lower-priced version of a popular high-end product. Essentially a very convincing fake. The Best in Hell is an excellent war dupe that would trick the majority of the audience. But not everyone. You see, I sent the movie to my dad. Aviation dad, for you guys that have been following me for a long time. And he told me, pay attention to the details. I was like, okay. I watched the movie twice. One of such scenes is this one, for example, with the Ukrainian drone operator in this sort of war room headquarters. These guys are too fresh. The place is too clean, too organized. Most of these underground bunkers are filled with exhausted operators that can barely get any decent sleep. Where are all the coffee mugs? The caffeine that keeps them awake. Where are the water bottles? Where are all the snacks laying around? A bunch of guys crammed together in this dirty environment. Some guys would probably be smoking to cope with the anxiety. And the stress, you can imagine, the sweat and the smell. It's like when you used to game with your buddies in the basement and stay there all night. And then you go get some fresh air, and when you come back, you're like, oh my god. The exact same situation. I also find it very hard to believe that such a command room, probably a battalion or even brigade headquarters, would focus so much on this one little firefight with 20 guys involved. I'm pretty sure these places in reality would be more like call centers. They would have to deal with dozens of similar firefights at the same time, with multiple units calling for artillery support and reinforcements. Or you could even hear the panic in their voices. In other words, it would be a complete mess, as if the headquarters had a map like in Battlefield with the exact location of all friendly units. Personally, I can imagine that in an actual war room, the biggest problem would be to locate your own units. You have a map, okay, so this guy called, okay, and he needs help, and this guy also is in trouble. We need to find reinforcements. Where are the reinforcements located? This is the conversation that they would have. Then they would call, okay, how many guys you have available, blah, blah, blah. And another thing, they immediately find the enemy mortar that is firing at them. I can almost guarantee that in reality it's not as easy as it seems. In the movie they simply launch a drone and it immediately finds that one mortar shelling your guys. Like, come on. It's very possible that the drone would actually spot a mortar crew but not the one that you're looking for. What do you do in this situation? Do you attack this exposed mortar unit, or do you keep looking for the one that is causing you trouble? Overall, you understand the big problem here is that everything is extremely smooth. Also, we don't see any problems regarding communications. Whenever they call headquarters, they reach headquarters. Whenever they call a unit, they answer. Half the time, you're not even able to reach the guys you want to reach. You see, when you do these Ukraine war videos, you have to go through a lot of combat footage. What you do see is some first-person view of a battle. And most of the time, the guys don't even know where the enemy is really located at.
There's no BMP?
Our guys are on the corner there.
Is the BMP still there?
Where? The first one?
Yeah, the one that they're on. Yeah.
But I can't see anything in there. It's only black.
Sometimes they get fired at from some direction, and they fire in the general direction of the enemy, but they haven't spotted the exact enemy.
Hey, 11 o'clock! 11 o'clock!
Whereas in the movie, man, it's like robots. It's like non-stop combat, as if they have some aimbot. In other words, this technicality is some sort of camouflage. Other characters are also unfazed by the events happening in front of their eyes. They remain stoic despite the death of a comrade. The characters are much closer to robots than to actual people. When this Ukraine mortar battery gets spotted and fired at, they're exposed and they suffer casualties. It's time to get the F out of there. The Ukrainians stay in position until the last survivor. And this one Ukrainian mortar crew survivors just walks away unfazed. It's like when you play Total War and you have only one artilleryman left doing the entire job for your cannon. And this is basically what's happening all throughout the best in hell. To me, it felt as if they were very expendable, just like ammunition. They're all one-dimensional. We know nothing about them. Since they never speak about their personal stories, it's only battle. Essentially, the movie is not much different than watching an airsoft competition or some sort of live streaming of a Call of Duty or Battlefield game. You have plenty of silly covers, ammo boxes piled up on top of each other, always at convenient places. The only thing missing was some explosive barrels. This impersonal nature makes me believe that this is closer to a video game than to actual combat. For example, every time we're introduced with a new weapon system, we get an animation which shows us all the specs of that equipment. By the way, fun fact, here they show the specs of a BMP-1 when in the movie it's actually a BMP-2, but anyway. I would go even as far as to say that even the equipment is impersonal, since it's the exact same one used by both sides. Brothers at war. I have to admit, at one point in the movie I lost track of what was going on, of what they were fighting for, and what groups were portrayed on screen. The guys use the same uniforms, the same weapons, all the same equipment. You don't even know who's who. The confusion is so real that the movie has to tell you in every scene that you're watching if it's Team Yellow or Team White. You know, at the beginning I told you there was no propaganda. Well, there is in fact some sort of political message. The main clue is revealed around half an hour into the movie when one of the Whites says they think like us.
Мы воевали сами с собой. Противник думал так же, как и мы. Мы знали все его шаги наперед, он знал наши.
The bland characters and absent storyline of The Best in Hell is actually done on purpose, since the differences between each side are erased as much as possible. The movie does everything to show that in the end, both sides are the same, like brothers fighting using the same military equipment and the same battle tactics. And this is the tragedy of the entire movie. The characters are not Russian or Ukrainian. They only differ by the color of the armbands that they have, white or yellow. All the fighters are Slavs, Eastern Europeans. They physically look the same and they all speak the same Russian language. Not a single word in Ukrainian, not a single Russian soldier that is ethnically Asian or from the Caucasus. But that was not enough for the movie. The soldiers also have the same faith and religion. In one scene, an Orthodox religious icon falls on the floor. A yellow soldier picks it up and makes the sign of the cross. Once the Russians clear the room, that same icon falls once again on the ground. A white soldier picks it up and he also makes the sign of the cross, the same way the yellow did moments before. Also, all the characters have call signs and not actual names that you could link to a national identity. On Team White, you have Group Polygon, Group Wesker, AGS Vivaldi, and Group Goblin. Meanwhile, the Ukraine commander is called Buran, which is Snowstorm. Throughout the battle, we don't see any Russian or Ukrainian flags either. Also notice how the soldiers don't have any patches of their units, no Z, no flags, not even Wagner patches, not even the V or the Z painted on the Russian vehicles. What I'm trying to say is that this movie, The Best in Hell, could have easily portrayed the Ukrainians as some sort of Azov battalion type of formation, with lots of World War II patches and insignias, if you know what I mean. They could have shown how these guys brutalize pro-Russian civilians and keep them as hostages in the middle of firefights. But they didn't. Instead of that, they could have shown Ukrainian tanks with World War II Wehrmacht Iron Crosses. They could have also picked the enemy as the foreign volunteers, or like the Russians call them, NATO mercenaries. As a matter of fact, in the movie, none of the Ukrainian soldiers use NATO weapons or equipment. We don't see any NLAWs or Javelins or M777 howitzers. Honestly, that would have made it easier to differentiate both groups and understand who's who. But that wasn't the narrative of the movie. Team Yellow uses Soviet equipment just like Team White. This theme is even more obvious at the end when Buran and Polygon, the commanders of each side, and the last two survivors of the slaughter, end up fighting a 1v1. The Ukrainian Buran tells Polygon to lay down his weapons, to which Polygon replies, "My grandfather did not take Berlin for me to surrender to you." As they fight hand to hand, Buran then says that his grandfather also took Berlin. It's the only scene where we actually learn a bit of the personal story of each character, and sadly it only lasts a minute. But the message, it's clear. It's the same people fighting some sort of civil war. Two brother Slavic nations slaughtering each other. And no matter the outcome of the battle, if it continues, there's no winner. At the end, spoiler, the only survivor, Polygon, so the Russian commander, simply takes command of a new detachment and tells them that they will go to battle the next day. Another day of meaningless slaughter. That's all I have for you. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, make sure to support me on Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.